hold on a second. Did a realtor just tell consumers to have a lawyer review the contract that they're going to get into with a builder? That is amazing. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, groundbreaking stuff.
Welcome back to the Real Estate 100 show. Today we have Jordon Scrinko from Precondo. This guy is straight up the authority on pre-construction housing, pre-construction condos, how to buy, should you buy, everything else in the industry when it comes to, and particularly how to sell them in Canada. And, it's funny because how I found out about Jordon is I made a video on my YouTube channel a couple of years ago talking about why you shouldn't buy a pre-construction condo. And in the comments section, it just lit up and everyone's like, Jordan's going to be mad at you. And I was like, who's Jordon? And I went and found his channel, and literally some of the best information out there on, especially the Toronto market, but now a lot of other areas of the market. If you go and you take a look at his website, which is precondo.ca, they've got the listings or the data for pretty much all of Canada now when it comes to condos and houses that are for sale. I guess it's really condos. I keep saying houses, but without further ado, welcome to the show, Jordon. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, you've been making the rounds. Canadian Real Estate Show, Tom Story Show, now the Real Estate 100 Show, the most unknown real estate podcast in the country.
Right.
What have you been talking about? What's going on with all the media coverage you're getting from all these guys?
Yeah, it feels like I've been on a book tour. And I've had the time for it because pre-construction sales volume is down 70% year over year. Yeah, so I mean, it's there's been a lot in the pre-construction market, right? Specifically in Toronto. I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about right now. I think the headline issues really is the assignment market is probably the worst and the most cutthroat I've ever seen it. And the assignment market, for those who don't know, is just, somebody who's selling, they bought a pre-construction 4 or 5 years ago. It's coming up on completion and occupancy today, and they want to resell that contract to a secondary buyer. Typically and historically, they would do so at a profit. Certainly seeing less of those today. And there's an abundance of assignment listings. Probably, I would say, the problem with assignments is it's like a dark pool, right? It's the dark web of real estate. They cannot be listed on MLS in most cases. And so there's no stats on them. Like, they get traded as exclusives. They literally get marketed and sold through broker WhatsApp groups, through Facebook groups, through email lists, and through call lists. And so it's really hard to get an idea of what assignments are going for, pricing wise, that kind of thing. The only way you can know is by talking to someone who does a high volume of assignments.
And that's you. You're that guy, right?
Yeah, we're one of them. And we're very close with the really 15 other brokers who do a lot of assignments in Toronto. Like, that's it. That's really that's how many of us there are that are doing more than 20 or 30 of these things a year. Yeah,
because pre-construction is not like an easy jam, right? Like, this is the hard part of real estate. How did you find yourself in this niche?
So I found myself in pre-construction because my background is in search engine optimization, and a client that I took on 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago when I was 18. Was a real estate agent. He was the number one real estate agent in Mississauga for condos. And he wanted to venture into the pre-construction world. So he said, hey, there's these 3 buildings that are launching soon in Mississauga. Let's rank a couple of organic websites for these search terms. And let's see if we do all right with it. We ended up doing 80 deals in the span of 6 months from those 3 websites. I got my consultancy fee, and then I saw what he earned, and I was like, I'm on the wrong side of this trade. Got my license, started precondo.ca, and here we are today. It's just that's kind of how it happened. I mean, it's a longer story than that. It always is, but the short of it is, while I was doing the SEO, I was in and around his office watching deals get signed, custom floor plans get made, realizing, hey, I kind of really enjoy the real estate side of this, and I'm sick of building websites. So how about I get on that side of the transaction? But yeah, no, it's so there's no data out there. But if I had to ballpark the assignment market right now, I would say probably triple the inventory we would see in a typical year.
Really? And what do you make of that? Is that just the values not being there and people needing to offload them, maybe not being able to qualify for the mortgages that they thought that they thought would be easy to get?
It's the mortgages.
It's the mortgages.
It's all our fault.
Wow.
It's all our fault. It's all our fault. It always is our fault.
He's on a podcast with a bunch of mortgage brokers, and he's like,
Yeah.
I don't think he meant to, but I get it.
Yeah, no, it's tough, right? I mean, you buy an investment property 4 or 5 years ago, you run your numbers based on interest rates at that time. You say, okay, this is manageable. And then fast forward 4 or 5 years, and suddenly the numbers aren't what you thought they were going to be. And you have closing costs, right, which are considerable on pre-construction in Toronto. And stack on top that the value isn't what you thought it was going to be.
Right.
Right.
The value's gone down.
Yeah. So I mean, the good news is anybody who bought 4 or 5 years ago, they're closing in a neutral or positive equity situation, right? They're not getting there's no appraisal gap here. They don't have to cough up $100,000 because condos are nice like that. They take a really long time to build. There's a different story in the freehold market, right? But yeah, I mean, their interest costs are up. Their cash flow is looking worse than ever. Values didn't go up as much as they thought. And so they're trying to dump these things. The problem with the assignment market is resale buyers don't even know that this little sub-market exists because they're not on MLS, right? And very few brokers in the city know where to find them or how to sell them, how to structure the deal, what it looks like. It involves a lot of math, and realtors aren't very particularly known for their math skills. And so
that's a whole different podcast.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? It's a very low liquidity market as it is. Now you dump triple the listings there, and it gets even worse.
So then, if you're a buyer, how do you go out and find those listings if you don't know that they exist? Like, where would somebody who's listening to a podcast like this go, hey, I'm going to go find these assignments that are potentially for sale at a deal? Where would they go to find them?
They would have to contact the heavy hitting pre-construction agents individually and ask for their list.
And why don't they go on the MLS?
Builders. So builders won't allow them on the MLS. They state in the agreement of purchase and sale in 9 out of 10 cases that you cannot list your assignment on MLS. They do this for a number of reasons. One big reason is in the event that they've held back inventory that they want to milk for extra profit margin later down the line. So maybe they hold back 50 units out of a 500 unit building. They're going to sell those right before closing. You would be competing on price with them at this point, right? So it protects them in that sense. And then also protecting the resale values is part of a consideration, people think, but the big reason is just leftover inventory.
It'd be kind of tough to sell those last 5 units if all of a sudden the other units are like, 20, 30, 40 grand cheaper.
Yeah.
Or in your
100%.
case, 100,000 cheaper.
Yeah.
So the guys that got stuck kind of behind on this and ended up buying and need to sell these properties now, were these investors? Were they normal people? Were they people who are planning on buying? Like, what was the type of person that was getting themselves into this situation?
So there's a little bit of everything. One thing that, usually when people sell on assignment, historically speaking, they're investors, a lot of whom got in with the intent of assignment flipping, right? So that's the number one reason assignments happen, is that was the intent when they purchased it.
Mm-hmm.
But because of COVID, a lot of people really shifted the way they live their life, right? And so there is a segment of the assignment listing pool right now that is people who actually bought these pre-constructions with the intent to move in, but their life looks drastically different today than they thought it was going to look like as a result of changes that they made through COVID. And so that 2-bedroom unit that was in the Junction doesn't work for them because now they live in Tulum or whatever, right? So there's some of that, but the biggest percentage is just people who bought investment units, and they either can't afford to close, or more often than not, they just don't really want to. They're not as certain in the real estate market. Their cash flow is going to be negative. They'd rather not close if they don't have to.
Gotcha. And are some of them just not closing? And what happens if they decide that they just don't want to close?
So far, the default rate is really, really low. So we had 8. Yeah, surprisingly.
What do you make of that?
Sorry?
What do you make of that?
Canadians are they'll do anything before they stop paying their mortgage, man. It's
so
really
true.
It's fascinating. They'll hold on to real estate with their with with a dying grip
Forever.
It's really, it's remarkable.
It's an iron grip on that real estate market when it comes to owning houses. Like, I won't eat for a week. That's fine.
Well, because people, who loses money on Canadian real estate? I'm not going to be the idiot.
What can go wrong? Yeah,
exactly.
You never lose, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big part of it. Like, we had a building, I'm very close with the developer, and I did 60 units there. It was 800 units across 2 different towers. They closed in January and February, respectively. And I asked the builder at lunch the other day, I was like, well, how many defaults were there? And she said on Tower 1, there was 1 default. It was a death. Estate couldn't close the property. And then there was 3 defaults on Tower 2. Tower 2, worth noting, was sold at a higher price than Tower 1 because it was sold a year later. So one was sold in 2016, the other was sold in 2017. So slightly higher prices on Tower 2. But to me, like 3 defaults out of 400 odd units is remarkably good considering where interest rates are. And considering how many assignments I saw in the market in that building, there was probably about 30, 35 units on the market. Almost 10% of the building was looking to get out before closing.
Wow.
And probably only 5 or 10 of them actually absorbed.
Interesting.
Because out of all those clients and customers, none of them, perceived that rates were going to go up the way they went.
No
either.
kidding.
I mean, what a surprise.
Yeah, you look at what that was said. Oh, rates are going to stay low. Not going to go up till 2024. Make those big purchases.
I didn't say any of that on my YouTube channel.
No,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
didn't, and that's why I love you.
Yeah.
I think is that
Question for you, Jordan. What's the average time period for construction of a building? Average.
The average marketed will be a 4-year cycle. The average actual completion will be 5.
Okay.
Right. And then you have your exceptions to the rule. You got your 70, 80 story towers that take 8, 9 years, but those are rare.
I mean, that's still amazing to think about. They're getting that large of a building done that quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. Yeah. I mean, China does them in a year. They're not the sturdiest.
They might fall down next year, but it was up in a year.
And you were saying that the rural areas are selling out really fast.
Yeah. So right now, we did, for the first quarter of this year, the GTA saw 2,400 pre-construction sales. A normal first quarter is 4,000 to 5,000 units, and last year's first quarter was 9,100 units.
Wow.
What's really interesting is the condos that are launching in the downtown core of Toronto. They're coming at, $1,700, $1,800 a square foot. Well, resale for a 1 or 2 year old building directly across the street from these buildings are $1,200 and $1,300 a square foot.
Right.
So you're paying a massive delta, you're paying a huge premium. And those buildings are not absorbing. Like, we're talking on launch, in a month after launch, they're managing to sell maybe 10% of the building, which means you're dead in the water because you lose all the momentum of the launch and you're nowhere near the number you need for construction financing. So you can't break ground, right? Unless you're one of them. You're a Pinnacle, you're a Concord, a Tridel, a Daniels, and you have different capital sources to allow you to get around that. But for most people, they don't have that, right? At the same time as that happening, anything that launches in Hamilton, in Markham, in Barrie, in Oakville, around that $1,000, $1,100, $1,200 a foot range, they're oversubscribing. So we just saw a launch in Markham sell 850 units in 6 days. They could have sold those 850 units in 6 minutes.
Wow.
They got over 3,000 worksheets. Over 3,000 people went to the bank, got a $5,000 bank draft to apply to buy a unit. And there was only 850 units available.
Wow. They're going to build more units in Oakville.
So why the difference? Like, why is it so insane on the outskirts and not in downtown?
So here's one big reason to me is pre-COVID, a 1-bedroom newly completed condo in downtown Hamilton would rent for $1,500 a month, and a 1-bedroom newly completed downtown Toronto condo would be $2,500 a month. Now that same condo in Hamilton is $2,200 a month, and that same condo in Toronto is still $2,500 a month.
Wow.
So your rental difference is $300,000, or sorry, your rental difference is $300 less on the condo in Hamilton, but your purchase difference is $250,000 less.
Wow. And do you think that's just because a lot more people are working from home, right? Instead of having to go to the office, if they work downtown and stuff, they can actually just work from home. So why buy downtown? Or
Well,
rent
that's why
downtown for that?
I believe that's why it started for sure, right? So
Yeah.
you saw Toronto rents crash, you saw Hamilton, Barrie, Oakville rents rip through COVID. And then it turns out, believe it or not, rents are pretty sticky when you bring 1 million people to a country in 1 year.
This is true.
And I haven't looked at the numbers on this. You can look up where immigration is happening and which cities they're primarily going to. But is Hamilton a hotspot for that?
Yeah, I mean 42% last year landed in Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny, right? Because Ontario is seeing across Canada the fastest intra-provincial emigration, but it's also seeing the fastest international immigration. Right, so it's kind of an interesting story there. But yeah, Hamilton's a big beneficiary of immigration for sure.
Oh wow. So interesting market. I mean, Hamilton and Toronto is always an interesting conversation anytime there's a hot or a cold real estate market, right? Because that kind of get a barometer of what's going on in Ontario based on what's happening in those two cities relative to each other. But I find it really interesting that condo market is so hot in that Hamilton area. When it comes to the type of people, just kind of segueing a little bit, that should be buying those pre-condos. Now, is it 3 to 5 years in Hamilton as well?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the type of buyer that should be buying these? And I'm going to come from a place of, yeah, I made the video on why you shouldn't buy pre-construction. I'm also really interested. I don't take anything that I say or any of my ideas as permanent at any time. As you get new information, I think it matters that you change your ideas and your beliefs and whatnot. I mean, Greg and I have talked about how I went from being a fixed rate mortgage broker 15 years ago to being a variable rate mortgage broker now, and somebody who recommends that when they're lower than fixed rates. But for me, like, I'm really interested in your take on, if they're taking 4 to 5 years to build, who are the buyers that should be buying those types of pre-constructions, especially with that type of time horizon?
And the demographic changing so dramatically, like, and it can change in 30 days.
Yeah, so I mean, there's two questions there. I think, like, who should and who is.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, inherently speculative investors who want to assign and flip shouldn't be buying pre-construction. The reality is that the cost of construction has risen so rapidly. Development levies, all the costs to build have risen considerably in the last 3 years, and so whether you're buying in Hamilton or Toronto doesn't really matter. You're paying more than the thing's intrinsically worth, right? So it's a speculative bet. There's no other way to sell it. You have to realize you're paying more than the thing is worth today, right? Mm-hmm. And then whether you're in Hamilton or Toronto, your negative cash flow, you just, unless you're assuming like 7% rental inflation year over year, right? Which some pro formas show that, believe it or not.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but yeah, so I mean, it's just the difference is how much negative cash flow. And so if you're the type of person who thinks, I'm going to buy this condo, I'm going to put 10% down, and I'm going to flip it for 150 grand profit in 4 years, never actually close on the thing. I mean, it's just a ridiculous way to invest your money. Who is buying them? By and large, like, the fastest growing segment of our buying pool is people buying for their children. Maybe not always necessarily for their children to move into, but the timeline kind of works. So they're shelling out the down payment or more. A lot of these parents are putting down 30, 40%. They're going to rent it for a few years until their kids are ready to move in, or they're just going to title it to their children, and maybe their kids don't need it, but at least they have an asset in the market, right? Indexed to real estate. So if Hamilton doesn't work for them, okay, well, cool. They can live in Barrie, but they have this asset that they can sell and move to that market. And then a fair amount of first-time home buyers do actually buy pre-construction, with the caveat being the down payment is always from mom and dad, almost always, right? Because the truth is, if you're a first-time home buyer and you're looking to get in the market, well, resale is cheaper and you can do 5% down. So why wouldn't you do resale? Mm-hmm. Unless timeline just didn't necessarily work for you. So that's a big part of who's buying as well.
I find the aspect of looking at an investment and going, okay, I'm buying this. if rents don't increase by X number of dollars, I'm not going to be able to make a profit on it, and I'm going to be subsidizing it or potentially not closing on it. Like, to me, when it just doesn't make sense that people are looking at the numbers and going, oh, well, rents are going to have to go up or prices are going to have to come down, and seeing that there's a disparity between the two and not recognizing the fact that that means that something's going to change. Because in 5 years, something is going to change to balance that market out with almost complete certainty, right?
To balance it out in what way? What do you mean?
Well, if you've got if the prices are too high for what they're paying for them relative to the rents, either the rents have to come up or the values have to come down.
Why?
Because markets tend to balance themselves, right?
But they never did in New York. Nobody cash flows at 20% in New York.
Yeah.
And I know I'm about to get roasted in the comments for even bringing the name New York into a conversation regarding Toronto. I'm not comparing apples to apples here. Okay.
Oh, and use the Apple word too. That was perfect.
Yeah. I worked it all in.
Whatever. Yeah, right.
I thought we were talking about Hamilton, but I'll let the people in the comments. I don't even have to say it, right? But so, do you think that that's kind of the path forward for Canada? Is we're going to find ourselves in that situation where there's always going to be that imbalance, or?
Well, I just think intrinsically, like, I kind of tend to agree with you, but the idea that people have been buying real estate in Hamilton or Toronto for the past 5 years and been making their money on cash flow is absurd, because it's not where they've been making their money. And it's, it's funny because we used to have a 4-page pro forma on any project we would decide we wanted to promote aggressively. So we pick 3 units, a 1 and den, and a 2-bedroom. We would do the cash flows, and it would build in every assumption, including property, including if you wanted to manage it versus if you self-managed it, your increase in interest cost year over year, your increase in insurance costs, like built in everything. And what was funny is we would slide those pro formas in front of our clients and we would show them the breakdown on the cash flow. And every single one of them would look us dead in the eyes and say, yes, but what will my condo be worth on completion? Nobody gave a shit what it cost to own versus the rent. Nobody cared. That was not interesting to any of these consumers. All that was interesting was that Uncle Jack bought a pre-construction 5 years ago. He closed on it today. He put 50 grand down and he made 150 in equity.
Right.
No kidding. So they were purely looking at it from a speculative standpoint, thinking it was an investment, but really what it was it was speculation all along.
100%.
Wow.
And all the books I've read tell me that's wrong. But for the last 2 decades, everyone who's been playing that game has been winning.
No kidding.
Right. So it's an interesting, I don't know. It's an interesting.
And I think I come at it from a different angle, because in Alberta, in Calgary, and Edmonton, we saw the other side of that, where it was like, oh, it makes sense to buy these things because the values are going up, and then oil crashes and the values actually come down, and the numbers don't work and things did balance. But it seems like that just wasn't the case in Toronto, and maybe Toronto and Vancouver and whatnot being as livable as they are and as popular as they are, maybe there is a market comparison to New York more than to many of the other markets. Maybe you're bang on when it comes to that comparison.
Well, and that brings up a good point, Jordan. Like, with the market in Vancouver, do you have any data on that? Because you're right. Everybody in the last 30 years who's bought pre-construction has made money, except for this last 24 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you look at the smaller centers where we are, like on Vancouver Island, which would be like Hamilton.
Mhm.
Now, we've never seen pre-construction sales before, and all of a sudden they're all over the place and they're gone.
Yeah. So, I mean, that part's particularly interesting. I mean, a friend of mine, a pre-construction broker, one of us platinum brokers here in Toronto. There's maybe, I don't know, 25, 30 of us in Toronto who do more than 200-300 units a year. It's a pretty small group. This individual pivoted to selling Calgary pre-construction to Torontonians and sort of carved out that niche. He did more volume than any of us by a order of magnitude last year. So right now, the hottest pre-construction to buy in Toronto is not actually Toronto or even Hamilton or Oakville. It's Calgary. Right. So you guys have full buildings selling out in hours there, and not a single local is purchasing a single unit.
Right.
Wow.
It's entirely purchased by Toronto.
And they're on all the locals are sitting there going, "We'll just wait because our economy is so freaking cyclical."
Right.
As soon as those oil prices come down, like those things are going up for sale, and it'll be a fire sale if the past is an indicator of the future. But it's interesting because I feel like the Toronto guys don't have the frame of reference that we have for how cyclical our economy is.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, my parents owned a home in Calgary, Southeast Calgary, for 9 years, put $100,000 into renovations and lost money on the exit, right? Just because of the timing of it. And so that's part of the reason I shied away from Calgary. But I mean, to your point about cash flow, well, the numbers they were positive, and now they're about neutral on the new launch prices in Calgary. So if someone is less speculative and wants that play on cash flow, Calgary provides that a little bit better than something like something like Toronto.
Yeah. I think this is interesting. Business Insider has done a whole bunch of articles recently on individualized markets and why you need to stop paying attention to national or even state statistics in the US. And you need to start looking at each individual market as a individual assessment. And I think if there's anything from this conversation, it's exactly that. In the same way that's happening in the US, Canada is clearly like, I don't know enough about Toronto to come in and have a conversation about buying a pre-construction. And if I tried to buy one there, I wouldn't have a clue what I'm doing, and I'm probably going to lose my shirt because I just don't understand that market. And I think now when you're looking at every other market, you've very much got to look at the individual stats and the individual market dynamics in order to actually make a buying decision, right?
I agree. And I think dynamics being a key word, it's not just about the stats, right? Because, for example, it's but it's considerably easier to bring new supply to Calgary than it is in Toronto, right? Like there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's really hard to build condos in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them don't apply in Calgary. And so that's another part of the equation when you're looking at this stuff. And that's why I think the speculative play has worked so well for so long, is because, I mean, it's the city that sees more immigration than any other city in Canada. It's also the slowest city in Canada to approve new housing. And Canada is the second slowest country out of 35 countries in the OECD to approve new housing. So if you really think about it, there's an argument to be made that Toronto is the slowest city to approve new housing in the world.
Wow. No kidding.
But it's also one of the fastest growing cities in the world. So it's like, of course, the speculative play has worked for a long time.
Yeah, no kidding.
So based on your experience in this market, why do you not spend more time out of the province? I notice you have some people in Montreal, I think in Quebec, but out of the province and especially in rural areas where we've got huge growth.
What what do you mean? Like what areas specifically?
Like for example, Prince George, which is the center of British Columbia. It's a bit of a shithole too. I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that too, but same thing. All of a sudden, there's huge growth there. Like, and there again, we're not talking hundreds of units. We're talking like 80 units or 60 units, but that kind of stuff. And where it does take a long time to sell them, and in smaller pocket areas where there's retirement communities, and we see more of that too. Mm-hmm. And I think your point before earlier, which is really cool. We've talked about parents helping kids get into the market. What a great idea! Holy crap! Like, and we've talked about that for years. So is there a way that your company could look outside of your geographical area? And
100%. Something we're working on actively. Like we're taking on 160 homes, a listing in Costa Rica. I'm buying one personally. So you get to be my neighbor, which is one of the incentives I'll list in the package. We've got something coming in out in Newfoundland. We've got something coming in Halifax, we think, just working on the specifics there. But yeah, no, we are expanding across the country. I think COVID, started or accelerated a trend. And I think that trend is more or less here to stay, like to a smaller degree, but I think people are now looking outside of, the nucleus for housing.
Toronto or Prince Rupert.
Yeah, Prince Rupert. Nobody. All right, I'm gonna get in trouble for that too. Forget it. Nobody wants to move to Prince Rupert either. It's funny because I know when I started doing this business back in 1926, we used the big thing for us was rental to sale conversions. Have you seen that kind of a market at all
In Toronto?
In Toronto,
No.
yeah, no.
I mean, you see like once in a blue moon.
So they're just ripping them down and building from scratch, basically.
Mhm.
Going up.
Interesting. So just kind of to shift the conversation here a little bit, going back to kind of the YouTube conversation, you've got an amazing channel here, and I'm going to put it up on the screen. And by the way, just to like talk about how exceptional this is, you've got 8,860 subscribers with only 131 videos. Like, your subscriber count to the number of videos that you have is phenomenal. It's unheard of in the real estate industry in Canada. And I think a lot of that is to do with how good a quality content you have. And you have one video here that is 7 things to know about pre-construction, which I've watched it. It's probably one of the best videos on understanding exactly what you should be getting into. By the way, if you want to win that competition you have with Tom Story and Steve Karish, a remake of this video, exact same title, updated, would probably get you there pretty fast because it's got 71,000 views already. But what would be your tips in 2023 going into investing in pre-construction? Knowing now what we know about what's happened in the last 2 years, and I think I heard you say on one of the other podcasts, you talked about basically buying futures in real estate, which I think is a really great way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
But what would be your advice going forward to people who are looking to buy and invest in this type of property?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So first and foremost, and I say it all the time, but it's more true today than it was when I made that video, and that is buy into a developer before you buy into a development, right? It's very easy to buy into some sexy renderings that don't disclose that there's obstructing buildings, and to look at a Himalayan salt yoga room and go, this is really cool, I want to buy here. But when projects get canceled, it can sometimes take 3, 4, 5 years to get canceled, and you're going to get your deposit back. So the opportunity cost of that capital, right, is huge. And so pick developers that are either institutionally backed or have a really long track record of delivering on what they say they're going to deliver on, and make sure they have full approvals. Because if they don't have full approvals and it takes longer than they anticipate to get those full approvals, and there's volatility in construction costs between your purchase and those approvals, their profit margin can disappear. And that matters to you, because if they don't have profit margin, they can't build it, right? So be very careful who you're investing with. There's a lot of small companies that come up out of nowhere. They do a couple successful builds, and then the market eats them alive, right? It happens all the time in Toronto. So
I don't think people realize what they're doing when they're buying pre-construction, right? Because what they're doing is they're providing basically financing for the builder to go and get their financing, right? Because they have to do a certain number of sales before they're able to actually get the financing from the bank to build the place.
Yeah, you're like an LP. You're an investor in a development more than a specific unit, right?
That's an important distinction, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. I mean, you're part of the capital stack at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Who are the builders in your area that you like, that are the trusted ones? Because I know you've got a bunch that you work with that you're confident in.
Man, every time I answer this question, I get a text after the thing goes
You're gonna get in trouble on this one too.
You left us out, and it's
Just say no comment.
I mean, there's a few that I like always promote everything they do, and they've never let me or my clients down. It's Tridel, Greywood, Diamante, Daniels is really good as well. Just some of those household names. I mean, Pinnacle's fantastic as well, because Pinnacle is one of those companies that, like, even if they don't hit their sales threshold, they're just going to start building anyways. They don't care. So yeah, those companies, right? Then there's some smaller, newer companies that are really good as well, or institutionally backed. You've got Slade and some others. So
when you say institutionally backed, what do you mean?
Just for Slate, for example, they don't have. Depending on the relationship a developer has with a lender, they can make different numbers work, right? So the benchmark is 15%, give or take. So your pro forma has to show 15% profit in order for you to get construction financing. Well, there are some developers who can go as low as 5 or 6% profit on a site and still get the same construction financing and at more favorable rates because of the partners they have in the land, right? So a lot of the time, the land, it'll be a JV between them and like a pension fund, right? And so it's far easier for them to actually see that site through. They're backed by someone, because a lot of people don't think developers are like, especially on TikTok, you get this greedy developers worth billions of dollars. It's like most of these guys don't have billions of dollars, right? They're just as leveraged as us, if not more sometimes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so you got to be careful that there's a little bit there's a little bit more backstopping there. There's a little bit more wiggle room, right? So Slate's one of those. Yeah, there's a lot of good names.
Now we got one of the tips. What are the other 6?
The other 6, review your floor plan carefully. So there's this new trend where, when you look at a floor plan and you have support columns, and they're always dark versus furniture is just outlines.
Yeah.
There's been a couple developers recently that has decided no longer are they going to color in the support columns. So it's just like a little round outline. So it looks like, if you're not paying attention or you just look at it quickly, or it's placed really well, you just think like, oh, that's like a little coffee table or an end table or something.
Meanwhile, it's just a beam going right through your living room.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
It's
You
super
can hang stuff on it.
very frustrating
No
to
kidding.
see that. So review your floor plans really carefully. Like there's more considerations than just that. Obviously, make sure you're not paying $1,700 a foot and 30% of your livable square footage is actually corridor space. Be very careful with that stuff. In the agreement of purchase and sale, always make sure you have a lawyer who specializes in pre-construction review the contract, particularly someone who does a lot of volume in pre-construction.
Hold on a second. Did a realtor just tell consumers to have a lawyer review the contract that they're going to get into with a builder? That is amazing. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, groundbreaking stuff.
And on that note, I would say find a realtor that will tell you to go to a lawyer when you've got a purchase contract that they aren't 100% familiar with and that a builder is in complete control of. That is probably the single best piece of advice I've heard from a realtor in quite some time. Thank you.
No kidding.
It seems so elementary, but you would be shocked by the amount of people who call me on closing who didn't use me when they purchased, who didn't have their contract reviewed by a lawyer. Like just sign the agreement of purchase and sale. You're given 10 calendar days by law specifically to have it reviewed by a lawyer, and you did nothing during those 10 days.
Wow.
Well, and what amazes me is the number of real estate agents that in my market, I'm not talking about your market, that will go to a builder and they'll sign somebody up and say, here, I'm introducing you. And then they're like hands off of the process, deal with the salesperson. I'm like, well, that salesperson doesn't represent you. They represent the builder.
Yeah.
And you're going to sign a contract that the realtor hasn't reviewed, a lawyer hasn't reviewed, and might have something like a clause in it that says you can't publicly market it for sale if you need to, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a big part of it too. Just like using somebody who specializes in pre-construction, you should be able to say to if your realtor calls themselves a pre-construction specialist, and you say to them, okay, I'm really interested in this unit, in this sort of floor range, faces south. Is there anything I need to know about? And they can't immediately tell you, yeah, the parking lot 2 streets down to your south on this corner, it has a plan submitted but not approved with the city for 37 stories. Like some people think it's crazy that I think everybody on my team should be able to just off the top of their head instantly know every corner, what it's zoned for, but to me, that's just like, that's your job.
Absolutely.
We get paid incredibly well. Like, I don't think that's asking too much. I really don't.
Totally.
To be able to just say to a client with certainty, like, hey, you need to be aware that view may be clear today, but in the next 5, 10, 15 years, it may not be clear because of this thing that potentially is coming up on this corner, right? Because the amount of people who have come to me and told me that they were sold a clear south view, a forever lake view, and it got blocked 10 years later. It's fascinating how many people get sold this stuff, and
Yeah. Unless you're right on the water, it's almost bound to happen at some point. Hey.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fair assumption too.
Yeah.
It's funny because that happens a lot in single family homes too, where, I mean, this green space behind us is always going to be green space. Wrong.
It's like, we just haven't been able to get the landowner to sell that plot yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it doesn't have that
crap.
park status on it,
Yeah.
it can go.
Yeah.
Unless you live right on the ocean and you've got
Yeah,
a
no
house
kidding.
that you can, with a yard right to the shoreline, right, Greg?
Yeah, exactly.
I think-
Nobody's going to build in front of me. That's for sure.
No. We're going to build a bunch of float homes in front of your house, Dad. Low income, rental only float homes.
I saw an article this week about that in Ontario. They're calling them lake squatters. They're just float homes that they're parking in the middle of the lake, and like, that's brilliant.
Just
We're going to
drop anchor and you're good to go.
Absolutely.
Wow.
We have a homeless guy. Well, he's not homeless anymore. So there you go. We have a guy who the community, he was hanging around where I live in Toronto called Humber Bay a lot. Community came together with a GoFundMe, raised him like $8,000. He bought a sailboat. Now he lives on the sailboat with his 4 dogs right in our bay.
Wow.
He's always out there. And if you ask him, hey, like, can you teach me how to sail? He'll take you out for an hour for free. It's remarkable. Great guy.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Incredible. Okay, so we've got some really good stuff here. Invest in the developer. Have a realtor that suggests that you have a legal contract reviewed by a lawyer. What's next? What else?
What else? Quantify the premium you're paying. So quantify it.
Okay.
Put the number on a piece of paper and stare at it and say, am I okay overpaying by this much?
Right.
And how you do that is you take your unit and you find an apples to apples comparison. So, in the same block, a building that's only 1 or 2 years old, comparable in fit and finish, you find yourself a unit that's similar to yours. Figure out what your unit is actually worth if it existed today in today's current market. Quantify the difference in price. Is it 50? Is it 150? Whatever it is, figure out the number that you're paying and decide if you're willing to make that jump, right? Because a lot of people will say to me, oh, like these are the prices, and they'll quantify it or rationalize it by saying, oh, the developer's just charging what it's going to be worth in the future. I'm like, well, developers aren't these omnipotent gods who know where the market's going to be in 5 years. So that's not exactly how this works.
You mean they don't have a crystal ball that
right?
Just like tells them information on a regular basis? Like,
yeah, exactly. It's like they're just pricing based on cost. They don't really care. Of course, they do care. They hope the market goes up so that everybody can close on their properties. But you know what I mean? Like, that's not how these pricing models get cooked up. So quantify it and decide if that's reasonable to you. And if you're going to, for the love of God, if you're going to rent it out, if it's going to be an investment property, maybe don't do a 4-page pro forma, but run the basic numbers or have your realtor run the basic numbers and use reasonable assumptions. 2% rental inflation, 3% rental inflation. Okay. Use reasonable, like, don't put in your pro forma interest rates are going to be 1.5% in 2028. Like, reasonable assumptions,
So why are these selling for a premium to a resale property that's like right there? It's already built. You know what you've got. You know if there's problems. Like, why is there such a premium? That's one thing I actually genuinely don't understand.
Would you pay more for a new Mercedes or a used Mercedes?
I'd pay more for a new Mercedes, but I probably wouldn't buy one that is a brand new model because it doesn't have everything.
I know. I actually agree with you. That's sort of, I 100% agree with you.
Your answer was pretty on point with that, though. I like that one.
Yeah,
it's so true. It's if it's brand spanking new, generally speaking, there's going to be a premium to it.
Yeah, and then also condos don't I mean, you own 0.11% of the land or whatever, but condos are commodities more than their land value. And so older buildings, maintenance fees increase over time. And so they actually lag the per square foot appreciation of newer buildings. Not to a massive degree if your building is well managed. And there are exceptions to the rule if you have a boutique in a perfect location and it's a really but generally speaking, a building in its first 10 years will keep up with the broader market's PSF appreciation, whereas in the decades following, it will start to trail off. The market does the condo market in Yorkville does 8% one year. Well, the 25-year-old building might only do 7% that year because it's older and a little rougher around the edges.
But you're right, though. I mean, the Mercedes example is awesome, and I think that it depends on the demographic as well. It depends on the buyer, and I know that when we bought our first home back in 1926, we bought a small place.
1926. You're not that old, Greg. Come on.
But you bought a small home, then you progressed accordingly, and I think that the new buyer. Do you think the new buyer today likes the shiny, new, fancy stuff?
Yeah,
as opposed to the 12-year-old building across the street.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. So do I.
And then, one big segment of pre-construction buyers that I haven't spoken about is downsizers. Like, it's huge in Toronto, and they're looking for something like downsizers are my favorite clients to work with. I have one right now that I've been working with since my first year in real estate, and we still haven't found them the right thing. Like, they have such specific requests, right? I need 2,000 to 3,000 square feet overlooking the Humber River. I need 3,000 square foot with a terrace with a clear unobstructed lake view that's not too far walking distance from this place, right? So it's like these very and a lot of the time, what they're looking for actually does not exist resale.
Really?
Right?
So they're sitting there kind of just waiting and biding their time until it's available.
Yeah. Like, a lot of the time it doesn't exist because there might be 18 resale units in Toronto that actually work for them if they become available in the resale market.
Mm-hmm.
But that's if they ever get listed, right? Whereas, like, one example was a downsizer I sold to a Tridel project, Eden Bridge on the Kingsway. They were looking for something very specific, a terrace unit of a certain size with a certain layout. And we had been looking for 2 years on the resale market. We just could not find it. It just never listed. Nothing close ever became available. So for them, paying 10% more than the thing is worth, but getting exactly what they want.
Right.
Yeah.
Where they're going to spend the last 20, 30 years of their life or whatever, it's worth paying that premium.
Yeah.
Right.
No kidding.
I'd buy the new Mercedes. I would buy the new Mercedes.
Are you trying to say you're buying a new Mercedes, Dad?
No, buying a new 1-ton truck, though. So that's
okay.
right.
Okay, good. There goes more of my inheritance.
No, you're right, though. I think that it's funny because, we have more of this, the baby boomers who are now, they wanted to stay in their homes and maybe they don't want anymore. And you're right. They absolutely need something specific. And I know, speaking from our own example, like we've talked about downsizing and moving to something that allows us a little bit less work around the yard and a bigger boat out front. So, there's lots of people out there that you're right, that are looking for something really specific and they don't mind paying the dollar for it.
Well, I think that, like, when you look at something that's so specific too, I think there is a level of that where it's like, okay, I know what I want and I want to get it. And like you said, people are willing to pay a premium to get exactly what they want. I mean, I look at my first house, definitely not what I wanted, exactly what I needed. But at a certain point, you flip that mentality and it's no longer you don't get what you want, you get what you need. It's you get what you want. Mm-hmm. And I think especially when you talk about downsizers and stuff, like if they are looking at this place saying, hey, this is the last place I'm going to live, why wouldn't you buy exactly what you want? And I think, even there with millennials who are starting to move from, their first place to their second place. We've seen a large increase in value in places like Toronto, Vancouver, stuff like that. They're probably willing to spend that premium to get exactly what they want versus, maybe what they need, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. And you can get creative, right? That's the fun thing. Once you move above a certain price point in pre-construction, developers are willing to sit down with you and their architect and make all the floor plan modifications and finish modifications that you want. Right.
So and at that point, it's like custom for them too, right? Like it's not like it's not a cookie cutter spec house that every single house on the same street looks the exact same. It's like, no, this is mine because of X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. Like you say, your downsize you've been working with for a long time is still waiting for that specific product. So being able to have the ability to go in there, and you're right, they don't mind paying the extra bucks for it at all. Yeah, they really don't. Cool comments.
Interesting. What about financing? How do you suggest guys go about getting financing on these projects that are 3 to 5 years out? And you don't have to say mortgage broker because there's 3 mortgage brokers on the channel. In fact, we turned it off like when my YouTube channel went national. We put in questions to make sure that people who are buying pre-constructions didn't ask us for those mortgages just because we didn't specialize in them, right? But and I think there's certain avenues you can go down to get them that are better than others. Where are you seeing people go to get those, and where would you recommend they go to get them?
I still recommend like go to brokers and shop it for 100%. But I mean, developers, because you have to provide a mortgage pre-approval within X days of buying a pre-construction, most builders will have a list of their preferred brokers. So they'll have a list. Here's 2 people from RBC, here's 2 people from Scotia, et cetera, et cetera. Go to the bank, get your mortgage pre-approval. And the reason it's from RBC and Scotia is because a lot of builders are starting. It used to be a lot more relaxed, but now a lot of builders are transitioning and realizing, we want the mortgage pre-approval to be on a big bank letterhead, because it's easier to validate for them.
So then those aren't brokers; those are mortgage specialists, right?
Yeah, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so people will go get their mortgage pre-approval from them. But I still tell people when it comes time to close, I still recommend that you shop it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know there's some things that the banks can do on those super long time
closings. Yeah,
that is just not available in the broker channel.
Yeah.
One of the things I wish that mortgage brokers would say more often to their clients who are buying a property that isn't going to be built for 2 or 3 years is go to your bank, get the approval there, because they may be able to get you a rate hold that is for the entire length of that time. And then, come back to us and we'll shop it. We'll still make sure it's the right mortgage for you when it comes time to take possession of it. But at that point, I think the right advice is exactly that. Go to the banks and the specialists that actually specialize in that property.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally.
And that's a broker saying that, right? So, I mean, that's a relatively good piece of advice, because why would I tell you to go elsewhere?
Yeah. No, I agree. And they're familiar with the project. They're familiar with the developer. They know who to contact there. It just makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
It's funny, your 7-step process for pre-condo sales applies to single family just as much.
Oh, totally.
Right. Like and there again, you've seen more and more of we were just down in Scottsdale, and my brother-in-law was looking at a new development where, I don't know, there's about 75 homes being built, and they're around 1.8 and up, and they're gone. But these are national developers too. And it's amazing the amount of money out there for people that are buying secondary homes. So I really like your idea of buying properties and helping your kids out, because what a way to get somebody into the market. And who gives a crap if you buy it at $1 million and in 10 years it's worth $1 million? Who cares? And if it's worth less, who cares? The crap, because you rented it out, it's covered the cost partially anyway, and you paid some of the principal down. So I love that idea. That's awesome.
Interesting. So what's next, Jordon? I mean, you've sold a portion of pre-condo. Obviously, you're going down to Costa Rica, and you're looking at property there and marketing property there. What's kind of next for you? I mean, you've done so much in a short period of time here already. Future's got to have some big ideas in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say at this point. I mean, running a business, something as we scaled, and luckily for me, I was very good at sales and very good at marketing, so we scaled very, very quickly. But things also break when you scale very, very quickly. And what became apparent to me was I'm a terrible operator, right? So that's a big part of the reason for the sale. So when it comes to managing people, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to systems and processes, I'm atrocious. And I'm not someone who likes to work on their weaknesses. I just like to fortify the strengths. And so the sale was more of a perfect marriage with people that would move the brand a lot quicker than myself, de-risk me a little bit. But I'm still going to stay super involved in pre-construction. I just want to take it more international. I've had a lot of friends relocate to Southeast Asia and to Costa Rica and to Mexico in the last 3 years. It's something I've always wanted to do. And I think there's a big gap, because as I was looking to purchase property in Costa Rica, I didn't know this whole time that a friend of mine who's a developer here in Toronto was also developing a site in Costa Rica. I only found that out recently. So I was down there trying to find people to guide me through the process. And what I realized was it's really fragmented. You got to learn this stuff on your own. It's really difficult to try to buy a second property in another country that isn't America, right? So I'm hoping to kind of expand that side of the business, and we'll see.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I mean, that was some of the best advice we've had on the channel so far. And honestly, some of the best advice from a real estate perspective I've seen. And I mean, your YouTube channel just goes to show that that you give great advice and you have great information. As far as I'm concerned, you're one of the best in the business, and I'd love to see more people get themselves a Jordon when it comes to buying real estate, because
You and me both.
people like you, man. Yeah. You operate a lot like we do. I mean, it's client first, ethics, honesty, to the point of realizing that you're not a good operator, because none of us are good operators either. Into that point as well. And Greg's like, yeah, I am. No, you're not.
I definitely did not say that. No.
But no, really appreciate you coming on, and looking forward to seeing what you do next, because you're a big piece of what this industry needs more of. So thank you for that.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, appreciate that, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome.